The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, while I was folding a pile of dish towels at the kitchen counter. I remember the dish towels specifically because my hands just stopped. I stood there holding a blue striped one, half folded, and I couldn't move. My sister Pauline's lawyer was on the phone. He told me that Pauline had left everything to me: her house in Kelowna, a rental property in Penticton, and just over $2.3 million in savings and investments. I had known she was sick. I had not known she had been preparing for this for 2 years without telling me. Pauline never married. She spent 34 years as an accountant, lived quietly, drove the same Subaru for 12 years, and apparently saved with a discipline that stunned even her own lawyer. He said the words slowly, like he was used to people needing time to absorb them. I thanked him. I hung up. And then I just stood there in my kitchen in Sudbury, with that dish towel in my hands, shaking. My sister was gone. And somehow, impossibly, she had given me everything she had. I was 67 years old. I had been retired for 2 years from 31 years of teaching elementary school. My pension covered my bills, and that was about it. I lived in the house I'd owned for decades, drove a 2014 Honda Civic, and considered a dinner out at a decent restaurant a treat worth planning for. I had never had money, not real money, not the kind that changes the shape of your life. I sat down at the kitchen table and cried for a long time, for Pauline mostly, for the fact that she had known exactly what she was doing and never said a word, because that was entirely her way. She was the practical one. She always said love should be useful. After a while, I wiped my face, made myself a cup of tea, and thought about what I wanted to do. The answer came to me quickly, and without question, I wanted to tell my son. My son Nathan had been struggling. He and his wife Courtney had bought a house in Barrie 3 years earlier at what turned out to be exactly the wrong moment. Prices had surged, and then the carrying costs had become brutal. They had 2 young boys, ages 4 and 6. Nathan worked in logistics. Courtney worked part-time at a dental office and spent the rest of her time managing the children and the household. They weren't in crisis, but I could see the strain every time I visited. Nathan looked tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. They argued quietly about things that were really arguments about money. I thought about how this might change things for them. Not solve everything, I wasn't naive, but ease something real. A lump sum to knock down the mortgage. Room to breathe. I felt such a rush of warmth thinking about it. Pauline would have approved. She liked practical love. I called Nathan. He didn't answer, which wasn't unusual. He was often in a meeting or somewhere loud. I left a message saying I had some news and to call me back when he could. Then I thought, no. This wasn't a phone call kind of thing. I wanted to see his face. I hadn't told anyone else yet. The lawyer had asked me to keep things quiet until the paperwork was further along, but Nathan was my son. I decided I'd drive up to Barrie the next day. That evening, though, Nathan called back and said he and Courtney were actually coming down to Sudbury that weekend. His younger brother Marcus lived here too, and they were planning a visit. Would I want to have everyone for Sunday dinner? I said yes immediately, and then I spent the next 4 days sitting with my news like a secret I couldn't stop touching. I thought about Pauline constantly. I went to the cemetery on Thursday and sat with her for a while and told her what I was planning to do. I think she would have laughed at me, a little. She always said I was too sentimental. I said that was rich, coming from someone who had quietly arranged to give me her life's work. Sunday arrived. I'd made pot roast, which was Nathan's favorite since he was a boy. Marcus came over mid-afternoon to help me set the table, and we had a glass of wine while things cooked, and he made me laugh about something at work, and it felt like a good day. A full day. Nathan and Courtney arrived around 4:30 with the boys, who came through the door like small tornadoes and immediately found the toy box I keep in the den. Courtney gave me a hug that felt a little distracted. She often seemed to have her mind somewhere else. But Nathan hugged me long and said the house smelled incredible. We sat down to dinner. The boys were chaotic in the delightful way children that age always are. Marcus told a long story about a camping trip gone wrong that had everyone laughing. It was easy, ordinary, warm. I felt so happy sitting there. After dinner, the boys went back to the den with a video. Marcus started washing up. Nathan and Courtney were still at the table with their wine, and I thought, this is the moment. I said I actually had something I needed to tell everyone. Marcus came back in from the kitchen and leaned against the doorway, still holding the dishcloth. I told them about Pauline, about the call, about what she had left behind. The table went quiet in a way that felt dense, like the air had thickened. Nathan stared at me. His eyes went glassy, and I could see him trying to hold it together because Marcus was there and the kids were nearby, and he was 38 years old and didn't like to cry in front of people. Marcus said quietly, "Oh, Mom." I told them I was still processing everything myself, that Pauline had clearly wanted me taken care of, and I intended to honor her by being thoughtful with what she'd left. That I would absolutely be helping Nathan and Courtney with the mortgage situation, because I knew things were tight, and I didn't want them to worry about that anymore. Nathan started to say something, and his voice broke, and he stopped. Courtney said, "That's incredible, truly." I said it was, and that Pauline was an extraordinary person, and that I missed her terribly. Then I excused myself to get the dessert I'd left in the fridge, a butter tart tray from the bakery in town that Nathan had loved since he was small. The kitchen is at the back of the house. You reach it through a short hallway, and the dining room is right around the corner. I had just reached the fridge when I heard Courtney's voice, low and quick, the way people talk when they think they're alone. She was saying, "This changes everything. She won't need all of it. She's retired, she's healthy, the pension covers her basics. We need to talk to Brad." Brad was her brother. He was a financial advisor in Oakville. Nathan said something I couldn't make out. Courtney said, "No, listen to me. She doesn't understand what to do with that much money. She'll just let it sit. Brad can set up a structure. We get added to the accounts, power of attorney, gradually. She trusts us. It wouldn't be taking anything. It would be protecting her." I stood at my own fridge with my hand on the door handle, and I felt the floor shift under me. Nathan's voice was low and uncomfortable. He said, "She's not incapable, Court." Courtney said, "I know that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying she's 67 and at some point she won't be. And if we're not involved now, it'll go through probate and be a mess. Brad does this all the time. It's just planning." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay. Yeah. Maybe. Let's see what Brad says." I didn't move for a very long time. I heard Marcus say something cheerful from the kitchen sink, asking if I needed help, and I made myself call back that I was fine, just getting the tarts. I stood there another few seconds. I looked at the butter tarts in the container in my hand. These small golden things that I had bought because my son loved them when he was 7 years old. I thought about how I had told them the news and felt so happy. I thought about how quickly a feeling can hollow out. I put the tarts on a plate and I went back to the table. I did not show anything. I had been a teacher for 3 decades. I had sat with rooms full of 8-year-olds who could read a face in an instant. I had learned a long time ago how to keep my expression neutral when I needed to think. We ate the tarts. The boys came back for theirs and made a mess with the icing. Nathan thanked me for dinner. Courtney said she was exhausted and they should probably get the boys into the car while they were still manageable. We hugged at the door. I kissed my grandsons. I waved them off. When Marcus came to say goodbye, he paused and looked at me. He said, "You okay?" I told him I was just tired, missing Pauline. He hugged me and said to call him this week. After I closed the door, I sat down in the armchair in the living room and did not move for a very long time. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt in the days that followed, because I think the easy version of this story is that I discovered my son was a villain and I cut him off and lived happily ever after. That isn't what happened. What happened was more complicated and, honestly, more painful. I did not think Nathan was a bad person. I thought he was a tired, financially stressed 38-year-old man who had just heard news that would change his life. And he had, in that immediate moment, let his wife steer him somewhere he probably knew was wrong. That did not make it okay, but it was different from him being someone I didn't know. Courtney was a different matter. What she had described was not planning. It was a strategy. Gradual access to accounts. Power of attorney obtained while I was healthy and therefore couldn't refuse, which would look like reasonable preparation, but function as control. She trusts us, she had said, as though that were a resource to be used. I had not spent 31 years teaching children to read and write and think, and I had not watched my sister spend her whole life being methodical and careful to let someone walk that plan through my front door without doing anything about it. The week after, I called my own lawyer. Her name is Frances, and she has handled my affairs since my divorce 20 years ago. I explained the situation. I told her about the inheritance, the timeline of the paperwork, and what I had overheard. I told her I wanted to understand exactly what my options were. Frances was very calm. She said that first, we needed to ensure the estate transfer was completed and that the properties and funds were held clearly in my name only. She said that no power of attorney should be signed under any circumstances without considerable thought and independent legal advice, and that I should not allow anyone, family or otherwise, to be added to my accounts or given advisory authority over my finances without going through her office first. She said none of this was unusual caution. She said she saw situations like this more often than people would believe. I asked her what situations like this usually came from. She said they came from money appearing where there hadn't been money before, and from people not having had time to adjust to that change yet. I found that a charitable interpretation. I also found it useful. Frances helped me set up a structure over the following weeks, a trust properly administered, an updated will with clear and specific directions. The Kelowna property was put into the trust. The Penticton rental was put into the trust. The investment accounts were retitled. She brought in a fee-only financial planner she'd worked with for years, a woman named Gail, who went through the entire picture with me and helped me understand what I had, what it could do, and what I should actually be thinking about at 67 in terms of my own future needs. I cannot tell you how clarifying it was, sitting in those meetings. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was in the driver's seat of something. Pauline would have found it very satisfying. She always said that understanding your own finances was a form of self-respect. I also did something I hadn't done in many years. I called my friend Elaine, who had been my closest friend since we were colleagues together in the late 90s, and I told her everything. She listened to the whole thing, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Oh, honey. Okay. What do you need?" What I needed, it turned out, was just to say it out loud to someone who loved me and had no stake in any of it. About a month after that Sunday dinner, Nathan called. He wanted to know how the estate was coming along, whether everything had transferred, whether there was anything he could help with. He mentioned, casually, that his brother-in-law Brad was very experienced with estate planning and could give me a free consultation if I needed guidance. I said, very pleasantly, that I was already working with my own lawyer and financial advisor and that everything was in good hands. I thanked him for thinking of me. There was a pause. Nathan said, "Right. That's great. I just thought, Brad does this all the time. It might be simpler." I said I was comfortable with my current team. Another pause. He said, "Okay. Good." He called me again 2 weeks after that. He asked if I'd given any more thought to the mortgage help I'd mentioned. I had mentioned it. I had, that Sunday, before any of this. I had said I wanted to help. I told him I was still getting everything sorted and that I would be in touch when I had a clearer picture. I said I did intend to help, in time, in a way that worked for everyone. That was true. It was still true. I wasn't punishing Nathan, but I was not going to write a large check while Courtney was having conversations with her brother about how to gradually access my accounts. Nathan accepted this. He didn't push. I think some part of him, the part that had sounded uncomfortable that Sunday evening, probably understood that something had shifted, and he didn't quite know how to address it without admitting he knew why. Courtney texted me a few times that fall. Friendly texts, asking about my plans for the holidays, sharing a photo of the boys in their Halloween costumes. I responded warmly to all of them. I loved my grandsons. I was not going to let this turn into a war, but I was also not going to forget what I had heard, and I was not going to pretend it hadn't told me something real about how my daughter-in-law understood my role in her family's financial future. In December, I went out to Kelowna. I had never spent real time there, only visits to see Pauline. The house was modest, a bungalow on a quiet street, with a view of the hills and a garden that Pauline had kept beautiful. I spent 4 days there alone. I walked around her neighborhood. I went through her things slowly and carefully. I found in a box in her closet every card I had ever sent her. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, cards from when our mother died, cards from when I was going through my divorce. She had kept all of them. I sat on her bedroom floor and cried until I was empty. And then I got up, made tea in her kitchen, and sat at her table looking out at the garden. And I thought about what I actually wanted my life to look like. I wanted to stay in my own house, at least for now. I wanted to travel. I had put off travel for 30 years because I couldn't afford it. I wanted to be present for my grandsons in a way that was loving and free and not tangled up in their parents' financial stress. And I wanted to help Nathan, genuinely. When I felt confident, I was doing it on terms that protected us both. In January, Francis helped me set up a registered education savings plan for each of my grandsons. I told Nathan about it when it was already done. He got quiet on the phone, and then he said, "Mom, you didn't have to do that." I said I wanted to. I said I hoped the boys would have choices that neither their father nor I had always had. Nathan said thank you, and his voice was rough, and I believe he meant it without any calculation at all. I also arranged to have a frank conversation with Nathan, without Courtney, which I acknowledged to him plainly was intentional. I told him I loved him. I told him I was aware that money did strange things to people and that I was not angry at him. I told him I had heard the conversation at the table that Sunday, and that I needed him to know I had heard it, and that I was asking him, as my son, as someone I trusted, to be someone I could continue to trust. He was very still for a long time. Then he said, "I should have stopped her." I said yes, he should have. I said I understood why he hadn't, and I wasn't going to hold it over him, but I needed him to understand that I was not someone who needed to be managed, that I was a 67-year-old woman with a law degree's worth of professional help around me, and that I would always be on his side. But that required him to be on mine. He said, "I know that, Mom. I know." I believed him. Not completely, not yet. Trust is rebuilt over time through behavior, not declarations. But I believed that he knew, and I thought that knowing might be enough to start with. In March, I booked a trip to Portugal. 2 weeks, in April, with Elaine. We had talked about going to Europe since we were in our 30s, and something always got in the way. Money, kids, jobs, timing. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon and said I was booking it. Did she want to come? And she said, before I even finished the sentence, yes, absolutely yes. On the morning I left for the airport, I stood in my kitchen, the same counter where I had been folding dish towels in October when everything changed. And I thought about Pauline. She was the practical one. She always said love should be useful. She had spent 34 years being careful and deliberate, and she had handed all of it to me. And I thought I was beginning to understand what she had meant by it. Not just the money. The permission. The instruction, in the most Pauline way possible, to stop waiting for things to be different, and start making them so. I picked up my bag and I walked out the door. I think about Pauline a lot when I try to make sense of what happened that year. Not the Pauline who left me her house and her savings and her quietly extraordinary life. The Pauline who used to say that you find out what people are made of when the stakes change. She said it about divorces, about illness, about job losses. She didn't say it about inheritance, but she could have. What I heard at my own dinner table that evening wasn't something I could unknow. That's the thing about overhearing a conversation you weren't meant to hear. It doesn't give you the option of pretending. I stood in my kitchen holding a tray of butter tarts, and I had a choice about what kind of person I was going to be from that moment forward. Not whether to forgive, not yet, but whether to be smart about what came next. I think about the version of myself who might have walked back in and said nothing, who might have let the check get written, the accounts get shared, the brother-in-law get involved, because it felt easier than the alternative. I understood her, that version. She was tired and grieving, and she just wanted her family to be good people. But I also knew she would have paid for that choice in ways that couldn't be undone. What I did instead, quietly, without drama, without a confrontation scene that would have felt satisfying for about 20 minutes and then made everything worse, was think. I called Francis. I sat with Gail. I took the time to actually understand what I had inherited and what I wanted to do with it, which turned out to be the most useful thing Pauline could have given me, separate from any amount of money. There's something I've come to believe about difficult situations, having lived through enough of them. The outcomes that feel like luck usually aren't. When I walked away from that year with my finances protected, my relationship with my son intact, and a trip to Portugal already booked, it wasn't because things fell my way. It was because I made a choice to be clear-eyed instead of wishful, to act from understanding instead of fear, and to hold myself to a standard I could live with, regardless of what anyone else did. Nathan needed to hear the truth from me, plainly and without cruelty. So I told him. That took something. It would have been easier to stay cold and distant, to let the hurt do the work of pushing him away. But I didn't raise him to navigate around hard conversations, and I wasn't willing to stop holding that standard just because it had turned in my direction. Pauline used to say love should be useful. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what that means in practice. I think it means being honest when honesty is hard. It means building something that will still be standing after the emotion passes. It means not letting fear of losing someone's approval turn you into someone who can be taken advantage of. I am 67 years old, and I have never felt more like myself. That, I think, is what she was really giving me.